This is the Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 18th chapter. Jesus said to the disciples, "If another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. If the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen to even the church, let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly I tell you, if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them." This is the gospel of the Lord. So I'd like to set up that gospel story for you a little bit today. I love that last verse, verse 20, the one that says, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them." A lot of people are probably familiar with that verse, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am among them." And it's an important one to note right now when it comes to wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, that screens count, and snail mail counts, and phones count, and front porches and backyards count. So this counts. God is with us, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, whatever that looks like. But that's the last verse of our reading for today. At the beginning of chapter 18, verse 1, which is 14 verses before our gospel story, the disciples ask Jesus the question, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Jesus then answers their question, and our gospel story for today is part of his answer. So when Jesus is talking about how to resolve conflict, which is what he's talking about in our story for today, when he's talking about how to resolve conflict and he says, if another member of the church sins against you, you go point out the fault when the 2 of you are alone. And if the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take 1 or 2 others with you so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence. When he says all of that, he was talking to the disciples, most likely men, and he was talking about internal conflict. When people who have a conflict who are both in the same community of faith together, the disciples, the same community of faith together. Jesus is talking to the disciples, and he tells them that if they have a personal conflict, they should try to resolve their conflict in this way. First, they should go try to talk to each other, try to figure it out together. And if they can't figure it out that way, then they bring someone else in to help them. And if that doesn't work, they bring in their friends and then the whole community to try to figure out the conflict. And this is a good method of problem solving when it comes to an internal conflict between 2 people from the same faith community who are on equal footing, have equal status, who have like similar positions in life. Now, this is also a popular method of problem solving. People like it because it's well laid out. Jesus gives like the step-by-step and has specific instructions of what to do. It's actually in our church constitution, St. Peter Constitution. It's in the ELCA Model Constitution. But this isn't the only example that the Bible gives us of how people deal with conflict. The Bible is actually full of stories of other ways people deal with problems. There is the story of the persistent widow and the unjust judge. The woman basically bothers the judge until he gives her justice. And then there's that time when Jesus didn't like what he saw happening in the temple, so he drove out the money changers and overturned the tables. Whether it was healing on the Sabbath or eating with tax collectors or just doing stuff people didn't like, Jesus stirred up some conflict in his day. And the Old Testament, it's full of stories of how people used violence as a way to deal with conflict. Like David and Goliath, Daniel in the lion's den. what we hear today is one approach for how to deal with conflict. And that approach can be helpful given the context that Jesus uses it in. A faith community where the two men dealing with a problem can safely gather together to have conversation, and where they have trusted people around them to help sort it out if they need assistance. And when we experience conflict in our St. Peter faith community, when it's appropriate, we do our best to live out these verses that Jesus gives us today. Maybe some of us or some of you may even live out these verses in conversations when you're dealing with conflict with family members or friends. We know that conflict is very real in our lives and in our community right now. Just like it was for Jesus in the temple the day he overturned the tables, and just like it was for that persistent widow and the unjust judge. The verses we hear today are only one of the faithful ways that we are given in the Bible to deal with conflict. It's not the only way. It's probably one of the least controversial ways, though, which is why people like to reference it a lot and put it in documents. But often people don't consider the context in which Jesus speaks about it. And often people don't consider how these verses and that method are especially dangerous when they are used by people in positions of power who abuse their authority. These verses are not telling us that as Christians we need to sit around quietly and just talk it all out. Sure, maybe with certain internal conflicts within the church, but sometimes dealing with conflict faithfully might look like turning some tables over or being super persistent. Sometimes dealing with conflict faithfully means making sure that people in positions of power don't abuse their authority. Today we are given one example, not the only example, of how as loved children of God, we can solve problems. Because where two or three are gathered, there's going to be conflict. Just kidding. See what I did there? Where two or three are gathered. In these verses, Jesus acknowledges the fact that as a community, those disciples are not going to be perfect. So he tries to help them out, and then he reminds them that he is with them. The same is true for all of us. None of us are perfect. We need help from Jesus, and we could always use a reminder that God is with us. Amen.